Imagine standing in the middle of a country so small you could drive across it before your coffee gets cold. It's raining. Not dramatically, just enough to blur the edges of things. The streets are quiet. Almost suspiciously quiet. To your left, a medieval castle rises out of the mist, stone walls stacked centuries ago. It's a kind of structure that feels less like history and more like a museum exhibit accidentally left outdoors. To your right, a glass office building. Clean, efficient, forgettable. No palm trees, no Lamborghinis. No gold-plated fountains. You pull out your phone and check your bank account. You're broke. But statistically, every single person around you is richer than almost anyone else on Earth. You're not in Dubai. You're not in Singapore. You're not even in Switzerland. You're standing in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, a nation that behaves less like a country and more like a perfectly optimized financial instrument, a sovereign hedge fund, disguised as a state. This is the wealthiest country on the planet by GDP per capita, and almost nobody understands how or why it works. How did a damp strip of land wedged between France, Germany, and Belgium become richer than the empires that once ruled it? Why are corporations like Amazon and Skype obsessed with registering offices here? And why is this quiet little country with medieval castles and free buses planning to mine asteroids in deep space? Because Luxembourg is not rich by accident. It is rich by design. And to understand that design, we have to start with a number that lies to you. The poor millionaires in Luxembourg. Numbers are not just data, they are doctrine. If you measure national wealth the way economists usually do, GDP per capita, Luxembourg doesn't just outperform other countries. It humiliates them. As of late 2024, the average Luxembourger produces over $135,000 in economic value per year on paper. The United States floats around $80,000. The United Kingdom limps in closer to $50,000. On spreadsheets, Luxembourg looks less like a country and more like a rounding error in humanity's favor. Even the minimum wage sounds absurd. A gas station attendant in Luxembourg City is legally entitled to over 2,600 euros a month. For skilled workers, the minimum jumps above 3,100 euros. From the outside, it feels like a cheat code. Move here, flip burgers, buy a Porsche, retire early. But this is where the illusion begins to crack. Because Luxembourg is a textbook example of golden handcuffs. Yes, incomes are massive, but the cost of existing is brutal. A one-bedroom apartment in the city center routinely costs 1,800 euros to 2,500 euros a month. A cappuccino can hit 6 euros. A sandwich, 12 euros. You earn like an elite. You spend like a hostage. And then comes a detail that makes the entire system feel surreal. Nearly half of the workforce doesn't live in Luxembourg at all. The commuters who power a country every morning. Around 220,000 people cross the borders into Luxembourg from France, Germany, and Belgium. They are known as frontaliers, cross-border workers. To put that into perspective, this is nearly half the country's entire working population. An invisible army that floods in at dawn and disappears by nightfall. Imagine if the entire population of a mid-sized American city commuted into Washington, D.C. every single day, earned the salaries, and then left before sunset. That is Luxembourg's economy. It doesn't just attract labor, it extracts it. The system is elegant in its ruthlessness. Luxembourg pays wages high enough to pull workers across borders, but housing costs high enough to push them back out again. The money stays, the people leave. GDP soars. Reality stays complicated. This is why Luxembourg can afford to pay a janitor what many professionals earn elsewhere, and why that same janitor might still live an hour away in another country. From the outside, it looks like prosperity. From the inside, it feels like pressure. And to understand how Luxembourg built a machine capable of pulling this off, we have to rewind to a time when this country had nothing but mud, rocks, and terrible geography. When Luxembourg was nobody for most of its history, Luxembourg wasn't rich. It wasn't even important. It was an agricultural backwater, valuable only because it sat inconveniently between larger powers. France marched through it. Germany marched through it. Empires used it like a hallway. It was invaded not because of what it had, but because of where it was. But in the mid-19th century, the ground betrayed its secret. Iron ore, low-grade, difficult to refine, but abundant. enough to change everything. Farmers became miners. Villages became industrial hubs. By the early 20th century, Luxembourg was no longer a footnote. It was a steel powerhouse. Its factories helped build New York's skyline. Its steel-reinforced bridges across Europe. The company Arbid, which would later become part of the world's largest steel conglomerate, became the beating heart of the nation. For a moment in history, Luxembourg wasn't small. It was essential. And then the global steel market collapsed. The moment that made Luxembourg rich. The 1970s destroyed industrial economies across the world. The Rust Belt in the United States, steel towns in Britain, factories across Europe. Most countries panicked. They subsidized dying industries. They printed money. They delayed the inevitable. Luxembourg didn't. Instead, it made a decision so cold, so pragmatic, that it would define its future for generations. It looked at its steel mills and walked away. No nostalgia, no nationalism, no pride, just a pivot. If Luxembourg could no longer make metal, it would make something better. It would make money, and it would do it quietly. This is where the real story begins. This is where steel turns into spreadsheets, furnaces into filing cabinets, and sovereignty into strategy. The blast furnaces went dark slowly, not with explosions or riots, but with spreadsheets. Luxembourg's steel industry didn't collapse overnight. It faded. Global prices fell. Competition intensified. Margins vanished. And by the late 1970s, the writing was already on the factory walls. Most nations respond to moments like this with denial. They protect legacy industries. They subsidize decline. They cling to identity. Luxembourg did something far more unsettling. It abandoned identity altogether. The country's leadership looked at the ruins of its industrial past and asked a brutally modern question. If we are small, what can we do better than anyone else? The answer wasn't manufacturing. It wasn't resources. It wasn't population. It was rules. The invention of a financial state Luxembourg didn't become rich by discovering something new. It became rich by rearranging the legal furniture of capitalism. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the government quietly built one of the most sophisticated financial environments on Earth. Not loud, not flashy, just precise. Stable political institutions, predictable courts, discrete banking laws, and taxes that felt negotiable. While larger countries argued about ideology, Luxembourg focused on incentives. It positioned itself as the place where capital could rest undisturbed. Two German and French banks suffocating under regulation, Luxembourg offered breathing room. Two global investors tired of volatility, it offered stability. Two corporations navigating Europe's fragmented tax systems, it offered clarity, or at least something that looked like it. This wasn't chaos, it was engineered calm. And capital loves calm. When banks replaced factories within 2 decades, Luxembourg transformed itself. The suit-covered steelworker was replaced by the suit-wearing tax attorney. Factory floors gave way to server rooms. Industrial output was replaced by financial flows. By the early 2000s, Luxembourg had become one of the world's most important financial hubs, despite having fewer people than most cities. Today, the financial sector accounts for roughly 30% of the country's GDP. There are around 125 banks operating in a nation of just over 660,000 people. That's one bank for every 5,000 residents. But calling it banking understates what Luxembourg actually built. This wasn't just a financial center. It was a vault. The art of quiet optimization. Luxembourg never advertised itself as a tax haven. It didn't need to. Instead, it mastered something more subtle: tax optimization. The language matters. A tax haven sounds criminal. Optimization sounds responsible. And for years, Luxembourg perfected the art of sitting just inside the rules while bending them into shapes no one else could. Corporations didn't need factories here. They didn't need warehouses. They didn't need workers. They needed addresses, an office, a legal entity, a routing point for profits moving across borders. And Luxembourg provided exactly that. But this quiet system stayed invisible until it didn't. When the vault door slipped in 2014, the illusion cracked. A massive leak of internal documents revealed what many had suspected, but few could prove. The scandal became known as LuxLeaks. Thousands of documents showed that Luxembourg had negotiated secret tax agreements with hundreds of the world's largest corporations, not small businesses. Not startups, giants, Pepsi, IKEA, FedEx, Amazon. These weren't loopholes stumbled upon accidentally. They were bespoke deals, approved in advance, designed to reduce effective tax rates to fractions of a percent. The mechanics were simple and devastating. Profits generated across Europe were funneled through Luxembourg-based entities. Paper transactions replaced real ones. Revenue passed through offices with no warehouses, no workers, and sometimes no real activity at all. And when the profits arrived, they were taxed barely. The man behind the system. At the center of this architecture stood one figure, Jean-Claude Juncker. For nearly 2 decades, he served as Luxembourg's prime minister and finance minister. He didn't invent global tax competition, but he refined it. Under his leadership, Luxembourg became indispensable to multinational accounting strategies. And then, in one of modern history's most surreal plot twists, Juncker left Luxembourg and became president of the European Commission, the very institution tasked with cracking down on aggressive tax avoidance. The fox wasn't just in charge of the henhouse, he helped design it. This wasn't corruption in the traditional sense. It was something far more modern, systemic legality. A black hole of capital. Today, foreign investment flowing through Luxembourg is estimated at around $4 trillion. To understand how absurd that number is, it exceeds the entire GDP of Germany. All of that capital parked in a country smaller than many U.S. counties. Money enters, tax obligations dissolve. Money exits cleaner. Luxembourg didn't steal wealth, it absorbed it. But this success created a new problem, one that money alone couldn't solve. There was nowhere left to put the people. This is where prosperity turns claustrophobic. This is where wealth begins to distort daily life. And this is where Luxembourg's greatest contradiction reveals itself, not in bank accounts, but in bedrooms. There is a moment in every economic miracle where success turns against itself. In Luxembourg, that moment arrived quietly, disguised as real estate listings. On paper, the country had done everything right. High wages, low unemployment, an endless river of global capital. But land doesn't multiply just because money does. And Luxembourg ran out of space. The housing crisis money created. If you want to understand Luxembourg's housing market, forget supply and demand curves. Think of monopoly, not the early game, the late game, where 3 players own everything. And everyone else is trapped circling the board, praying not to land on rent. A tiny group of families, landowners, and construction firms control most of the buildable land in the country. And they are in no rush to build. Why would they be? When land prices rise by 8 to 10% per year, doing nothing is the most profitable strategy available. Concrete is optional. Scarcity is guaranteed. The result is a housing market so distorted that it breaks intuition. This is the only country on earth where 6-figure salaries still don't buy security. Meet the upper middle class poor. Consider Sarah. Sarah is a teacher, a profession that struggles almost everywhere. In Luxembourg, she earns close to 90,000 euros a year. By global standards, she's elite, top 1% income territory. She lives in a 40-square-meter studio. Her rent is 1,600 euros a month before utilities. Buying a home, the average standalone house now exceeds 1 million euros. Sarah is not failing. The system is working exactly as designed. Because Luxembourg doesn't just price housing, it filters people. Only those willing to accept permanent precarity get to stay. Everyone else becomes a commuter, a temporary resident, or a visitor. The city stays clean. The streets stay quiet. The population stays controlled, and stress becomes the national background noise. When shelter becomes a luxury asset, this creates a uniquely modern dystopia. Public spaces are immaculate. Crime is low. Infrastructure works. Buses arrive on time. Trains are spotless. The country feels safe, almost antiseptic. And yet, people are anxious. Because the most basic human need, shelter, has been financialized beyond reach. Rent eats 40 to 50% of income for many residents. Homeownership feels like a fantasy reserved for the already wealthy. Even the government knows the situation is unstable. They've begun threatening to tax unused land, a move so radical in Luxembourg that it's jokingly referred to as communism. When your economy is built on capital appreciation, even modest regulation feels revolutionary. The social contract starts to crack. Luxembourg understands one dangerous truth. If people can't afford to live here, the banks eventually leave. And if the banks leave, everything collapses. So the state did something unusual. It decided to compensate. If it couldn't make housing cheap, it would make everything else feel free. The Great Free Experiment on February 29, 2020. Luxembourg became the first country in the world to make all public transport completely free. No tickets, no apps, no zones, trains, trams, buses. Whether you're a billionaire banker or a tourist passing through, you just get on. Officially, the goal was to reduce traffic. Luxembourg suffers from some of the worst congestion in Europe, fueled by those daily cross-border workers. Unofficially, it was a pressure valve. When rent is unbearable, the state removes friction everywhere else. Free transport doesn't fix the housing crisis, but it softens the pain. And it signals something deeper. The state as sugar daddy free transport was just the beginning. Luxembourg's social safety net is one of the most generous on earth. Healthcare is top tier. Unemployment benefits are robust. Family allowances provide roughly €300 per child per month. Tax-free, up to age 18 or 25 if studying. 3 children. That's nearly €1,000 a month just for existing. The message is clear. Stay calm. We've got you. It creates a society that is extremely comfortable and quietly dependent. The state cushions every fall. But the cushion only works as long as the money keeps flowing. And Luxembourg knows that flow isn't guaranteed. So once again, it pivots. Not outward. Not sideways. Upward. This is where the story stops being about Europe. This is where it starts sounding like science fiction. Because Luxembourg isn't just planning for the next decade. It's planning for space. When a country runs out of land, out of patience, and out of political room to maneuver, it has 2 options. It can slow down, or it can look for a frontier no one else is willing to touch. Luxembourg chose the second. The most ambitious loophole ever written in 2017. Luxembourg passed a law so strange it barely made headlines. It didn't regulate banks. It didn't adjust taxes. It didn't address housing. It addressed asteroids. The law stated that if a Luxembourg-registered company traveled into space, extracted resources from a celestial body, and brought them back, those resources would legally belong to the company. Not the asteroid, not the orbit, just the rocks. It was a legal sleight of hand, so clean it bordered on genius. Technically, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 forbids nations from claiming ownership over celestial bodies. Luxembourg simply nodded politely and claimed ownership over the output instead. The ultimate optimization strategy. This wasn't science fiction. It was sovereign foresight. Why a tiny country cares about space, Luxembourg understands something most nations don't. The future doesn't reward size, it rewards positioning. A single metallic asteroid can contain more platinum, gold, and rare earth metals than humanity has mined in its entire history. Trillions of dollars floating, unregulated, and untaxed. For a country whose wealth was built on rooting capital rather than producing goods, space mining wasn't a gamble. It was continuity. They began investing hundreds of millions into space resource startups. They created a dedicated government agency. They marketed themselves as the legal home of off-world extraction. If the bet succeeds, Luxembourg doesn't just stay rich, it becomes post-terrestrial. And if it fails, they lose a few $100 million. Spare change for a country whose GDP hovers near $85 billion. This is the mindset that defines Luxembourg. Small means flexible. Flexible means ruthless. Ruthless means survival. But while the country looks toward the stars, there is something unresolved on Earth, a ghost that refuses to stay buried. The history Luxembourg didn't want audited for decades after World War II. Luxembourg told itself a simple story. We were invaded. We resisted. We suffered. It was comforting. It was heroic. And it was incomplete. In 2015, historian Vincent Artuso published a report that shattered the national myth. The Artuso report revealed an uncomfortable truth. When Nazi Germany invaded Luxembourg, The government fled, but the administration stayed. Civil servants, police, bureaucrats. They didn't just comply. They collaborated. Luxembourg's Administrative Commission actively helped identify, register, and deport Jewish residents. Lists were provided. Orders were enforced. Out of roughly 3,700 Jews living in Luxembourg before the war, more than 1,000 were deported to camps like Auschwitz. Very few survived. For 70 years, this story lived in the shadows. The country focused instead on forced conscription, young Luxembourgers, compelled to fight for the German army, while avoiding the darker truth of administrative cooperation. Why does this matter now? Because memory shapes behavior. Neutrality as redemption today. Luxembourg positions itself as the moral center of Europe. It hosts the European Court of Justice. It champions European unity. It speaks the language of rule, of law, and cooperation. This obsession with being the good European isn't accidental. It is compensatory. A nation built on financial discretion and historical silence now seeks legitimacy through institutions, law, and supranational morality. The vault wants absolution. But identity problems don't disappear just because balance sheets grow. They resurface in culture. The Tower of Babel economy. Walk into a bakery in Luxembourg City and say hello, and you've entered linguistic roulette. French governs labor law and cafes. German dominates newspapers and churches. English rules finance. Now Luxembourgish, a Moselle-Franconian dialect once barely written down, is the key to belonging. Nearly half of Luxembourg's residents are foreign-born. The native population is slowly becoming a minority in its own capital. In response, language became a gate. To gain citizenship, you must pass a Luxembourgish language exam. Not to work, not to live, to belong. The result is a two-tier society. Temporary elites, bankers, consultants, executives, earning fortunes, speaking English, staying 5 years, then leaving. And permanent locales, working in government, holding political power, speaking the language. Watching outsiders cycle through their economy. Everyone is here to make money. Almost no one is here to make a home. What Luxembourg really is. So what is Luxembourg? A country, or a corporation with a flag? It's a place where you can ride a free train to a 6-figure job and still never own a home. A place built on steel, rescued by capital flows, and now betting its future on rocks floating in space. It is statistically the richest nation on Earth, and emotionally one of the quietest after 6 p.m., when half the workforce drives back across the border. Luxembourg is capitalism without sentiment. Perfectly optimized, perfectly stable, and perfectly hollow. Its national motto is Mir Welblei, wat mir shin. We want to remain what we are. But when a country pivots from steel to banks, from banks to asteroids, and from people to balance sheets, one question remains: do they even know what they are anymore? And if you're rethinking about moving there for that $140,000 GDP per capita, go ahead. Just remember to bring a tent. Luxembourg likes to present itself as finished, solved, optimized. A country that figured out capitalism early and simply kept compounding the result. But the truth is more unsettling. Luxembourg is not a destination. It is an experiment still running. When GDP becomes a mirror, not a measured GDP per capita tells you how much value flows through a country. A country. It does not tell you how it feels to live there. In Luxembourg, the number is astronomical, but the experience is strangely weightless. The city empties every evening. The cafes quiet down. Lights stay on in office towers where no one lives, because half the people who make the country rich are already gone, driving back across borders, back to lives that actually belong to them. Luxembourg didn't solve the problem of work-life balance. It outsourced life. The country optimized for capital mobility, not community, for throughput, not belonging. And this is the hidden cost of extreme efficiency. The capitalism of perfect behavior. Luxembourg is what happens when capitalism behaves too well. There are no slums, no visible decay, no chaos. Everything functions, but nothing roots. People arrive with contracts and exit strategies. Friendships feel temporary. Neighborhoods feel transitional. Even wealth here feels abstract, something you manage rather than enjoy. This is not decadence. It's sterility. A nation engineered to be useful, not meaningful. The unasked question Luxembourg proves something most countries would rather not confront. You can buy stability, you can buy safety. You can even buy time. But when your entire national identity is built around servicing global capital, you eventually ask a dangerous question. Who is this country actually for? The investors, the commuters, the citizens, or the balance sheet? Because when pressure comes, when tax loopholes close, when banking margins shrink, when space mining doesn't pay off, the system will demand sacrifice, and someone will have to live there long enough to make it. Why this story matters now? Luxembourg isn't unique. It's just early. The same pressures are building everywhere. Housing as an asset class. Wages disconnected from security. States bribing citizens with benefits instead of solving structural problems. What Luxembourg shows us is the end game of financialized modernity. Clean, calm, profitable, and quietly alienating. A place where everything works, except attachment. The final audit, so is Luxembourg, the richest country in the world. On paper, absolutely. But wealth isn't just what flows through accounts. It's what stays after 6 p.m. It's who remains when the commuters leave. It's whether a place feels like a home or a hotel. Luxembourg has mastered money, but it's still negotiating meaning. And maybe that's the real lesson. In the modern world, you don't need size, resources, or even people to be rich. You just need the right rules. The question is whether you're willing to live inside them. If you enjoyed this audit of one of the strangest economic systems on Earth, let the algorithm know. And if you want to understand the next tiny country quietly bending the global order in its favor, you know where to look.